You can't outrun a bad diet. What I mean by that is AI is not going to solve your basic problems if you haven't done some of the basic blocking and tackling. You can get started on some of that stuff pretty easily, whether it's getting some of your data together. And then once you've got that data together, that's when the AI magic starts. As a chief data officer, you want to help others see the value in data. You also want collaborators and partners who have a big vision. They should be thinking about how do we use data to improve the business? Because you could spend all the time in the world building what you think is the right data product and then sharing it with the HR team and then finding out that this actually doesn't meet their needs.
Why should I pay more attention to data, and how will I benefit from investing more in it and giving the proper attention?
What data is allowing you to do is actually, even for small organizations, they can scale like empires with just few employees. And then large organizations that are kind of empires, it gives them full visibility into what is happening in their organization and then start building workflows and processes in AI that help automate things that they otherwise would not have done.
If you had one word of advice for executives that want to prepare their teams for what's coming with AI, what would you tell them?
There's two things I want to balance here.
Mohammed, again, it's great to have you here. An honor for me to have you on the podcast. But before we dive in, would you mind giving us an idea of your background and what you're doing today?
Yeah, so I'm kind of like a hybrid of what you might consider like an entrepreneur and kind of a corporate kind of business leader, if you will. My background is I spent most of my career at McKinsey, where I was an analyst and then a consultant and a manager. I went to business school. I came back to McKinsey, and then about 12 years ago or so, McKinsey got pretty serious about data and analytics and started up an analytics practice. And I served as general manager for that practice, and I helped grow it. And it ultimately became McKinsey Analytics. And so I helped basically set the groundwork and build a team for McKinsey Analytics. I then went to Ameriprise Financial and I ran data and analytics there, mainly on the customer and marketing side, but then later the enterprise data strategy. And we had several use cases that we took. Ameriprise is a diversified financial services firm. So we have financial advisors who work with customers. So really building all the customer analytics that our advisors can, so they can benefit our customers and then we can grow with them and retain them better. And then I returned to McKinsey as chief data officer. In that capacity at McKinsey, I built several data products with our different, you could say, divisions or our practices. And then that led me to Domo, where I have been now for almost 4 years, where I work with several of our customers actually in building out data products, and then also leveraging AI. So that's kind of like my background in a nutshell, really data and analytics heavy. But there's kind of a part of the story that I don't often share, which is that actually early in my career, while I was like an analyst at McKinsey, I was actually starting a company, and that experience was very telling. When all the money I made as an analyst, I used it to start this company. At the time, Facebook was pretty early, and basically it was a social shopping application for consumer electronics. Because at the time I was younger, I liked consumer electronics. I thought people want better reviews of products before they buy it. Facebook was in its early days. It turned out that that idea didn't end up being successful, but I had spent basically all my money that I'd earned basically building that company up with a friend. And when I went to business school, I was really, I would say, deflated because of that experience. And when I was in business school, there was a new approach of actually launching things called a lean startup approach, which was basically like, don't build things. First, confirm that there's market demand before you build anything. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. So at that time, I started another company while I was in business school. And this time we had 1,000 customers before I even built out the product. A lot of it was like, you go do the marketing, you go build the landing pages, you go sell a value proposition. Yeah, you spend a little bit to build like a sample of what the product might be. And then we were off to the races, right? And that mentality, because of that, I would say almost traumatic experience that I had where I spent all my money and I failed. I've now realized that when it comes to data and analytics, you want to make sure that you're really building data products and data solutions that really solve problems, because a lot of organizations can spend 2 to 3 years building out a data foundation without actually knowing the problems they're trying to solve.
Mm.
And in the same way, just like in the startup approach, when you're trying to build and generate market demand for something and see if there's market demand, you can do the same thing with data and analytics too. You don't have to have all the data in one place. You can go validate and test. If I had this product that I had for my entire field, would this create value? And how do you test that? You literally, at Ameriprise, I'm not kidding. We brought data together from like 10 of our different systems. We put it together in Excel spreadsheets. And then we went to, I think, like 20 different financial advisors with some insights and said, hey, if you had this and we could help you predict customer churn, would this be valuable? And they were like, yes, we love this. The CEO saw it. And then once we did that, we productionalized it and then we scaled it out. And so how can you take that approach to really make sure that there's market demand for what you're building before you invest tens of millions or even hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to get like all the platform stuff set up?
And that's crazy because it's so common to do that. You think that's the way, you build something, you invest millions of dollars in it, and even from the entrepreneurship side, you go raise funds, the VCs, then you build and then you sell. And you have to flip that model, start with the demand, look at what's going on out there, and then build according to what your customers are telling you to build essentially.
100%. And what I find often is, I mean, look, with a lot of corporate kind of, and that's why I call like chief data officers. I actually think of them as chief data entrepreneurs, really. Inside the
Mhm.
organization, they should be thinking about how do we use data to improve the business, whether it's for HR, for sales, for marketing, right, for finance. But a lot of it is really understanding how the business operates,
Mm.
because what you find is that you could spend all the time in the world building what you think is the right data product and then sharing it with the HR team and then finding out that this actually doesn't meet their needs. And so the question is, how quickly can you learn from the HR team? Like, what does their day in the life actually look like? What are really their top few problems that they have? What do the workflows look like? How do we go build something that will really have measurable and meaningful impact? And then let's work backwards. Let's figure out what's the data we need to get that going and support it.
So question, suppose I'm the CHRO of a company, right? What what questions would you ask me, coming, now at Domo and from the consulting experience and entrepreneurship experience to
Yeah.
help me figure out what, where do I start? What value do I have hidden in my data? What questions would you ask me as a CHRO to help me uncover those
Yeah.
low hanging fruits, let's say?
Well, look, I mean, there's kind of two approaches that I like to use. One is really open-ended. Tell me about your problems. Tell me about the challenges you're facing. And often I try to focus on what are your top three problems that you're focusing on. Um, and then, I usually have in my mind some problems that I think uh, the leaders may have. So one thing I'll share with you that we've seen at a lot of organizations, especially ones where there are large workforce teams, is that staffing optimization is a big deal. Like staffing optimization, and then also workforce planning is a big deal. So, like, let me share with you, we work with one of the largest um, automotive retailers here in the US, and they have over 1,200 stores. And it turns out there's a lot of seasonality in their business, and they need to start planning out their hiring for their seasonal workforce well in advance. And if they don't, then they end up hiring more temporary work and temporary workers. And temporary workers are quite expensive. Not only that, they also don't get the longevity, right? They don't get the talent that they can maybe build and keep for a longer term period of time. And so what we help them do is actually go build a whole process to keep track of all of their headcount. And by the way, all this was done in Excel, kind of as best as possible by the stores, but we helped them build a whole system bringing data together from all of their stores, as well as their sales data and their forecasts, to help them start now doing almost like 3 4 month planning out, store by store. What's the seasonal? How do we make sure that we get the right um, the recruiters now in place to plan for 2 months down the road? We're going to need someone, and then in addition to that, on a day by day level, enabling the store managers to staff better, so that way they don't overstaff and then pay extra, and then understaff, and then lose sales.
Mhm.
And it's been quite staggering. That organization has gone from 75% of temporary workers and 25% full-time to now the inverse, 75% full-time and 25% part-time, and they've got much more labor efficiency as well. Now that's step one. Now other organizations, what they'll do too with these like large teams, they'll start to say, how do we actually go hire the best talent that we think is going to work the best? So we did work, and this was work that I did while I was at McKinsey, was how do you actually hire the best employees if you run a quick service restaurant chain? And it turns out there's a whole number of factors, but you can assess someone's, for example, how customer friendly they are through surveys and interaction. But then also what we found was that how close they live to that location makes a big deal, because transportation is a big deal as well. And it turns out if they live within 1 mile, like, the chances are if they're both, they live close by and they're very friendly, those are potential people that can rise through the ranks relatively quickly and do well and build a career at some of these, at these franchisee type organizations. Again, but every business is different. If you're running a call
Yeah.
center, it's very different than running a QSR versus if you're running claims and you're doing adjusting. Like they're different. And we work with an insurance company that does the same thing. They look for salespeople. How do you find the right talent for the sale? And they hire so many salespeople, and only so many salespeople are successful. How do we figure out the type of profile of those that are going to be more likely to be successful ahead of time, and then really focus in on that talent and hire that talent as much as we can, because we know they're going to have higher win rates. So, so it's a combination of, what are your big problems, but then also
Yeah.
sharing some examples of what organizations are doing. And the reality is that as cool as these problems sound, like predicting who's going to be the right, most organizations' problems are still very, I would say, basic.
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we've got all of our workflows and processes associated with our HR processes are streamlined. How do we ensure that we know who our top 100 employees are, our top 1% of employees are, because we want to make sure we do the best to retain them and build talent development profiles around, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like a lot of it, like let's start with the basics, and then we can build on these as we've got the foundation in the right place.
Yeah, because I can imagine it's hard to understand what aspects, what data is even relevant to the problem I'm solving, and sometimes that might be a challenge as well. What data do I need in order to solve this problem I have? Sometimes I don't even know that. Sometimes it's not obvious. And the question that I wanted to ask, I asked you if what questions would you ask me? But now I'm going to flip the questions. And you, as the
Mm-hmm.
chief data officer, what questions would you like to be asked by the leadership team of, I'm not saying Domo today, but if you were my chief data officer, what questions would you
Mm-hmm.
like me to ask you to better partner and create value for the organization?
That's a great question. I would I would love to hear. Um, so what gets me most excited is when I hear a customer or a business partner that has a vision on how they want to change the way their organization works. So it's almost like, hey, I want to transform the way we sell our product. I was with an asset manager yesterday, and they built a new sales group, and they have I think a visionary leader, and the visionary leader wants to figure out better ways to go attract the right customers. And I shared a couple ideas, but he's like, oh yeah, I would love to do X, Y, and Z. I'd love to build a data product that did the following things, because I know that this would help my sales team, win more deals. So it's almost like, as a chief data officer, you want to help others see the value in data. Uh, at the same time, you also want collaborators and partners who have a big vision and who want to entrust you to help them solve that problem. And if you can work with a partner that says to you, hey, I've got this vision, I want to transform the way my HR organization works, I want to double our retention, I want to uh, hire the best talent, I want to help reduce our waste by this much, and it's a big priority. And I know data and analytics can help us. Can you guide me on how we can go about that? Oh boy, am I
Hmm.
empowered And is that so much fun when you hear that?
That's great. You're talking about the understanding what the value of data is, and it might be obvious for you, but for many leaders and executives that are not data experts, they might not see it. So why should I pay more attention to data, and how will I benefit from investing more in it and giving the proper attention?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that if I'm a small organization, um, well, actually, let me say it slightly differently. I think what data allows you to do now, I'm just going to give maybe like a hypothetical example, right?
Yeah.
1,500 years ago, if you were, running a big empire, you know, um, you know, and you'd realize that, hey, I might be in Rome, but I've got many different um, interests all around the world, and I've got different generals that are everywhere in the world, and the information, what ends up happening is that in a world where you lack the information on what's happening in each part of your empire, if you will, you have to, in that case, hire really, really good generals who and give them quite a bit of autonomy to run how they see fit and then escalate things to you as necessary. But there's also a lot of risk associated with it. So at any point in time, if you want information from Asia, it might take you a week to get that information or longer. So you really don't know what's happening in Asia. This is 1,500 years ago. Okay, now let's just go back 10 years, right? If I run a large organization, even if I want to get all of my information on what's happening globally across my business, you'll find that, some information is at your fingertips, but a lot isn't. A lot isn't. And so the reality now is when you've built that data foundation, you've got all that information at your fingertips, you kind of know everything that's happening in your business. And why does that matter? You can respond very quickly. You can figure out how you can optimize faster. But then the most important part becomes is now you can start to use AI and machine learning to help you do things that, honestly are really almost impossible for humans to do. So, for example, when I was at Ameriprise, we built a lot of customer segmentation and churn models and so on. And, we looked at hundreds of data points by customer to understand if they were likely to churn or to grow with us and their lifetime value. And the reality is, a salesperson, they don't need to know how the model works. They just need to understand why the model is coming up with the answer it is, so that way they can go and engage with the customer in the right way. Now, if I had a human manually go through all of these 100 data points and I had every financial advisor go review it, it'd be a pretty excruciating task. They just wouldn't do it. So the machine learning models, on the other hand, they can go sift through that data, they can come up with an insight, they can come up with the analysis, and they can go suggest to the advisor, here's what I think you should do and why. All of a sudden now, I'm now automating a lot of analytics and insights that otherwise would not have been possible. We've been very labor intensive, and quite frankly, we would have done. And now we're seeing, even built on top of that, we're seeing automation of workflows and processes. So if I'm doing an interview with someone, um, and there's now all these tools that will, they'll record and they'll transcribe that interview, they'll summarize it, they'll talk about the highlights. They might even, and so if I'm in HR and I'm doing this through interview process, how often is it that you go through an interview process and people don't put their notes together? uh, you know, can we just make that easier? Can we make the and then how often are we picking up on other information and looking at the full picture versus just, looking at a subset, right? How do we bring all the information together in a more efficient, effective way? These are just small examples, but now we're going to see this automation that will just help augment us, right? So I think the reality now is what data is allowing you to do is actually, even for small organizations, small teams can scale like empires with just few employees. And then large organizations that are kind of empires, it gives them full visibility into what the heck is happening in their organization, and then start building workflows and processes and AI that help automate things that they otherwise would not have done or have been too time consuming to do.
And now you're talking about AI, right? And you cannot use AI and leverage that if you don't have the data in place and structure in a very clean way, right? So we're talking all
That's
about that,
correct.
the automation, the AI. But a challenge that I hear a lot is, I have all this data and all these different sources, all these different systems, and it's a mess. It's very complicated to get everything connected, everything together, so it makes sense. Probably we're getting a bit more technical here now, but how do I integrate that? What options
Yeah.
do I have, kind of, to make it easy without having to, do a system migration and all of that implicates.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, okay, let's go back in history again. Let's go back in history, but this
All
time
right,
not 1500
let's see.
years. Let's go back 10 years. Um, 10 years ago, if you wanted to share a file with somebody, you literally had to use like disks or hard drives or USB sticks. OneDrive was just coming around, Dropbox was just coming around. Not everybody had it. Now everybody has shared drives. Um, 10 years ago, if you wanted to drive somewhere and get GPS located, you had a separate GPS, you had a separate camera, you had a separate phone, um, you had a DVD player, you had 10 different things. And by the way, none of these 10 things worked with each other. You just had 10 different devices and so on. And what's happened in 10 years? The smartphones and the bandwidth and everything is done on the phone now. It's easy. We don't have to be technical to figure out how to share an image, how to take an image, how to share a video, how to watch, listen to music. I mean, remember the days when you had to figure out how to get an MP3 and then download it and then play it on the right MP3 player and da da da. You know, those days are gone. And there's a reason for that, is because this consumerization of this. Now, by the way, this is happening in a lot of industries. In printing, we've got the traditional printing press. That used to make up a vast majority of the printing. Um, and in the traditional printing press, you would actually, make um, like you would create plates for every
Mm.
page, and then you choose different inks, and so the Heidelbergs and so on. There's a specific name for these types of printers. Offset printers, I think, is what they're
Uh-huh.
called. And you spent quite a bit of like it's pretty capital intensive to not only buy the units but also make all the plates for each of the prints you're going to do it. But you would print large quantities of these. In the last in the last couple of decades, what's grown is something called digital printing, and now digital printing takes up almost 50% of the market share of printing. But digital doesn't require you to create plates. It doesn't, everything's kind of all in one. You can actually send small jobs. It can do the printing, the binding, everything all in one. It's kind of pretty integrated. Now, the reality is that offset printing is still more cost effective when you're printing very large loads, volumes, but digital printing for high variety, for a lot of volume, for a lot of small jobs and even medium-sized jobs is quite competitive. But it's integrated. It's integrated, right? I think the same thing is happening with data. I think the traditional approach to data was that offset printing approach. We have specialized tool for ingestion, specialized for storage, specialized for AI, specialized for visualization, specialized. And what ends up happening is it's expensive to put it together. It's expensive to go produce something new. Everybody has to go figure out the new data model just to go figure out how to do an analysis. On the flip side, we're seeing other tools like the digital printer, like Domo, right? So Domo is basically an all-in-one platform that allows you to connect to data, integrate it, analyze it, and you just need to be someone who knows how to use Excel to figure out how to use it, because it's all drag and drop, AI integrated, and then you can go build apps and so on. So that's what's happening in the data space. It's happening slower than I'd like it to happen, but I know that it's happened in other industries, and it's going to happen here too. Um, and and ultimately, these types of things, they take a little bit of time, but that's where the industry is headed, in my opinion.
So you're essentially saying that, so in case a company like Domo technology will come on top of all the other different tools and data sets and the places where you storage your data, as another layer where everything gets connected there, and then from there you can run all sorts of automations and AIs and
100%.
okay.
100%. When you use your iPhone, you don't really care about the file system that's underneath, this, that, and the other. You don't even care what the model of the camera is. You just know that Apple chooses the right camera and the right processor and this, that, and the other. So basically, you're going to have these more unified layers, like Domo, that's the company I work for, right? That make it really easy, right, for organizations to go connect to data, because we have 1,000 data connectors. We have data integration. We can work on top of your data warehouse, whether it's Snowflake or BigQuery and so on. And then we govern all the data. We help you build insights, visualizations. We help you build AI workflows and automations. We help you build apps, all in one platform, all very rapidly.
That's great. That's great. When you think about that, I'm not sure if you heard about the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, talking about probably the end of SaaS and things like that. But do you think that the SaaS model, now let me reformulate the question. In the future, will it matter where you storage your data with all these tools that we're now having like Domo? I mean, we will need a system
Yeah.
for tracking candidates and a system for this and a system for that. I mean, it can just go into just one spreadsheet and that's it.
Yeah,
How do you see that?
so I see something slightly differently. I think data is everywhere, and data will be everywhere, and you'll need to connect to it. And I do think tools that can help you manage and keep track of the data is still going to be important and valuable, because you want governance on top of the data too, wherever it may be. Um, I think I do agree with Satya that SaaS is changing big time. And the reason is that, okay, now let's go back in time again. 20 some years ago, I was an intern and I was making custom software applications at General Mills. Okay. And I was in college, I was making software applications, everything was, .NET and so on, and Java. And so everything was being done in-house. Okay. And then what ended up happening was we had the rise of the cloud. And then we started seeing Salesforce and a bunch of these very focused vertical solutions, whether it's Workday, whether it's Salesforce, whether it's HubSpot, whether it's NetSuite, da da da. So you see all these very, they have a persona in mind: the CRO, the COO, the CHRO, the CFO, etc. And they built, software applications in the cloud that do everything they need. And this was great, because now, I didn't have to have internal teams rebuilding stuff. It was cheaper than hosting my own and managing it and having engineers build it. Why, by the way, why should I go build an ERP solution if there's one company that's done a really good job and I can license it for the fraction of the cost, and so on? Okay, so then that was the generation we've been living in. Now we're getting to this new generation where it turns out when you're buying SaaS software, you've got to customize it to the way your organization works. So if I buy Salesforce, I might do a pretty large implementation. And it turns out the way my company uses Salesforce is pretty different than the way another company uses Salesforce. So I'm going to spend, a lot in that implementation, sometimes more than what I even spend on the software. And I think people are starting to open their eyes and say, hey, a lot of these SaaS solutions, they have these different packages and applications and this and that and the other that are add-ons. I have to do customization. Well, can I just use flexible tooling like Domo or other tools, and literally just build those applications much faster myself, and build it in such a way that is built in the way my organization already functions? So now I don't have to train everybody to use Salesforce or use some ERP solution or some other CR, whatever. I'm literally building something in the way my team already works, in the style, look, feels the way they want it to look. And I've done it both cheaper and faster than buying off the shelf SaaS solution. That's what's happening, I think, is that we're going back in time to the 20 years ago where we built custom software, but now building custom software, the cost is coming down so much, and you can build, and what you need though are flexible platforms to go build these solutions on top of. Now, the one thing, Damien, I'll add here is there are two things that become really valuable in this world.
Yeah,
It turns out the technology part's the easy part. It's going to become the easy part. The hard part is actually going in and understanding all of the workflows in the business and helping reimagine those processes. That's a consulting type of framing. It's not engineering, it's a consulting kind of business solution kind of mindset. And the second thing is the change management. Once you build the solutions, how do you ensure people use it and you get the value from it and it's getting adopted and those types of pieces? And so in those cases, I think those are going to be a lot more important in the next 5 to 10 years as we start to see more and more software platforms come with these integrated things. And quite frankly, the competition is going to be really, really hard, like strong in the software side, because it's becoming easier and easier and easier now to develop even the foundational pieces for this too, right? So the value is going to accrue, I think, now more on the folks in the business who can actually go identify the solutions, go implement the solutions with their business partners. That's where the value, and that's hard. That's hard work.
that's it. I was reading something that say when it comes to AI implementation, as you said, technology is not the issue. Is that it's going to be a change management problem, because you have to make people go from what they're doing today to do things in a different way. The problem is that transition, it takes a time, it takes get used to that. So sometimes, if I'm an analyst and I'm doing my job and I'm, responding emails, and it takes time for me to learn how to use AIs. It takes time to learn how to use the tool. And I really don't have much time and I need to get this work done quickly. So I'll keep doing what I'm doing until
Yeah.
I'm not saying dead, but
So let me share with you an example specifically on this, right? Because we've seen this, and we've kind of now for the last year, actually more than the last year, been adjusting our approach to helping our customers. And so one of the things we do is we call it a data product sprint, and it's like a 2 to 3 week, very intensive consulting engagement with our customers, where we at the end of this engagement, we deliver 5 deliverables. The first is what we call business value assessment. Here's how much it's worth to you to solve this problem from a productivity perspective, from a cost savings, from a revenue generation perspective, et cetera. Here's the cost, or here's the value, and then here's also what the estimated cost may be to go build this out. The second thing we do is we build something called a current and future state workflow diagram. We interview the actual business stakeholders. What do they do today? What are the challenges? What the future state should look like. The third thing we do is we do a data health assessment. We go look at what data do you have? Is it available? And we do some, general kind of just health quality checks on the data, because we need to know what data will be needed to use to power this data product or this AI solution. The fourth thing we do is we actually get a UX designer and we work and build a clickable prototype of what this new solution will look like. So, for example, like the staffing solution that I talked to you about, or the store manager application, or whatever it may be, to help them run their business better. Here's what it's actually going to look like. So now the stakeholders, the business stakeholders, can say, "Yeah, this is exactly what I need." And the final thing is a statement of work. You know, here's how many weeks it will take to build it. Here's what the cost will be, right? And that also feeds into our business value assessment. Those 5 deliverables. And what we found is has been a transformative experience for a lot of our business stakeholders where we've done this, because they're starting to now say, we're not building technology for technology's sake. We're going to help unlock, $5 million of value, $1 million, $10 million of value. Here's what you're going to get. They feel like they have a trusted partner. Um, we help build the capabilities on their team so that they can also take this over. But we also offer to help where we can. And it's been a game changer. And I think that is the way um, organizations, I think that's the way I think um, these types of data products and solutions will start to get built out in organizations.
we're running out of time here now, Mohammed. But if you had one word of advice for leaders, for executives that want to prepare their teams, their culture for what's coming with AI, what in general, what would you tell them?
It's a good question. It's a good question. So I'm just reflecting on that. Okay. There's two things I want to balance here. One is that AI is truly transformational, and it can really help you improve significantly. But as a business leader, don't forget about the basics. Don't forget about the basics. Um, you know, there's this phrase that I love that I heard from someone, and I can't forget it. It is, you can't outrun a bad diet. It doesn't matter how much running you do. If you eat junk food and you eat too much, you're not going to get fit. Now, obviously, something has changed. We have Ozempic now. We have a couple of these drugs and
Yeah,
stuff. But trust me, we'll learn more about what happens there. But you can't outrun a bad diet. And it turns out, by the way, Ozempic and all these drugs, they just keep you from eating too much. Like they suppress your appetite significantly. Right? So you can't outrun a bad diet. And what I mean by that is AI is not going to solve your basic problems if you haven't done some of the basic blocking and tackling. And you can get started on some of that stuff pretty easily, right? Whether it's getting some of your data together, and then once you've got that data together, that's when the AI magic starts. So think about those simple and basic problems, build momentum, and then go from there.
all right. Mohammed, great advice. Once again, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all these insights, these uh, advice, and really, it's been great to have you here. So thanks for making the time.
Damon, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me.